Uh,
It could take just a minute or two to let some people filter
mhm.
in. Um, we were just griping about the fact that Substack forces us to do these lives via our phone rather
Mhm.
than on a computer. Lots of people joining.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Hi,
Welcome
everyone.
everyone. Yeah. Okay, so
Cool.
well we already got 25 people right off the bat, so this is
Awesome.
Mhm.
this is exciting. So I guess I'll just start out by saying that we're going to be interviewing Melody today. Melody has a Substack. So before we jump into any of the conversations, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit? Introduce like what your Substack's about, and plug all that stuff.
Sure. My name is Melody Wright, and I'm a housing analyst with a background in mortgage finance. And so I post a lot about what's going on in housing as well as commercial real estate, and then also about the banking system, how that works with mortgage, which is really relevant right now with what we're seeing going down in auto, and
Mm.
how that contagion can spread across the system because I was in corporate finance, financial planning and analysis during the last crisis at a mortgage company. So I learned quite a bit about how this all works. And most
Mhm.
people don't understand the back end of the system. So that's what I talk about in my Substack. So you can find me at M3 Melody Substack. I also have a YouTube, M3 Melody YouTube, and on X Twitter at M3_Melody.
Awesome.
Nice.
Cool. And
Very
and
good.
for those of you who are coming to us via Melody, we're the Boyd Institute here. So my name is Peter, and then we also have William Miller here, and we're a kind of like new think tank in DC that operates based on these 3-month policy sprints. And so we're focused on housing right now. We just recently published a couple of new articles. You should check out our Substack or the Boyd Institute. We have a lot of really good stuff there, and we're excited to have a conversation with Melody and pick her brain a little bit and talk about
Yeah.
housing. So, Will, you want to jump us off?
Yeah. I'll kick it off. I think as we go through these conversations, we really want to start with just like sort of defining that the state of the housing market, whether it's a crisis. The moniker housing crisis or housing affordability crisis is thrown around pretty often. But I think increasingly, at least I'm seeing a fault line emerge there, where some people are of the opinion that we're not in a crisis, um, and for a number of different reasons, like just that the superstar cities are more desirable than other cities, but everybody has this idea that they should have affordable access to those like job centers and amenity centers. How do you look at like the state of the housing market, whether it's a crisis, and how it may, why would now be different than any other time when houses
Sure.
were expensive?
Yeah, good question. So I believe it's a crisis. It's a crisis that's been masked by a lot of different things, and we'll
Hmm.
talk about that. But I think, since the late 80s, housing has been used as a vehicle to kind of give the economy a jump start. And during that time period, that almost 40 years, you could look at your household median income and you could look at your median home price. And those tracked before that time period, those tracked in a very logical pattern. Well, then you can see starting really when you can start to see home prices start to rise just a little bit was back in the 70s when women started joining the workforce. And so it took two households to kind of start to afford that. And that was another big bout of inflation. But what's happened is essentially they ran out of borrowers that could afford this, like Jane and John Doe. And instead, the investors really started piling into this market. They did so back in the S&L crisis as well. And that's what this market has been about. I shared with you guys, we had the lowest first time home buyers last year since they started tracking in the 80s. I mean, that's just pure insanity. And so ultimately, what's happened is because you had, you can remember back to the COVID. And I now think that like 2007, 2008, that was just a little like, oh, yes, we got a little crazy. People got a pat on the hand or slap on the hand. But then everybody realized, oh, wait, I can really get into this. And that was kind of fueled by Wall Street came in at the behest of Fannie and Freddie and FHA at the end of the last cycle and bought up all those foreclosed homes. And so from there, you had every television show. You cannot turn the television on without seeing some fix and flip show out there because mom and pop wanted to get into that. So they got into it and they did long-term rental. But then COVID hit, and essentially you had everybody think, oh, we're going to do revenge travel forevermore from this point forward. And so all these folks and influencers, I mean, social media plays a big part of this. All these influencers came out and said, buy a short term rental, or they put people in buses and took them down to look at multifamily properties and did all
Mhm.
these crazy syndications because people were looking for passive income. But the problem is what you've seen for the past 3 years is virtually a frozen housing market because your regular American can no way afford this. And what we're seeing is the only way they can do it is with their parents helping them.
Mhm.
I mean, the Fed did a big story on that. So yes, we're at a crisis point because you can go talk to. I've driven over 10,000 miles across the country, talk to people, and any young American's going to tell you right now they don't believe that they can afford a house without assistance. And basically, we're looking at people making 100 to 150,000 to even 300,000 feeling like they're poor. And so
Mhm.
it is definitely a crisis, but I said a whole bunch right there, so I'll stop and see if you wanna pick on any of those threads, or I can keep going.
Yeah.
So
Sorry, go ahead. Well, you can go
there's been
first.
like this inflow of demand. The market's been flush with demand, whether it's through, like you said, the passive income bros on the internet talking about, levering up to get 10 different Airbnbs, or if you talk about just the relaxation of lending standards and terms over time, um, and now, like to your point, what I've seen is that the short-term rental market is all of those properties are hitting the market now, and none of them can sell. And then from the institutional side, on the investor side, you're seeing large institution large institutions become net sellers for 6 straight quarters now.
Right.
um, why isn't there more price discovery in markets right now? Given those dynamics, you would think that home prices should be coming down, and I think rents have been more volatile to the downside in a lot of big markets. But why not home prices? Maybe talk about the lock-in effects that are taking place.
Yeah, yeah. So let me talk a little bit. I think that what's happening is because we're having so few sales. That is one of the reasons why that median's not coming down. And you can look across, like I track 85 markets. I actually look at them each week, all 85. And you can see price cuts across the board, but we're not going to see the price declines until those actually sell. And then you have this dynamic, which I'm not sure if you're aware, but last cycle, the National Association of Realtor got into a lot of hot water and had to restate home prices from 2008 to 2011. I study these numbers religiously, and I can tell you that something is rotten in the state of Denmark. There's no question about it. I've caught them doing modeling that doesn't make any sense. So that's one component. Then you can look at the case Schiller, which they look at recorded mortgages, and that really is the best way to do this. But it's very severely lagged, and it excludes condos, and it also excludes sales that happen within 6 months of each other. And that's kind of a big deal in this
Mm,
investor because what investor bros have been doing is selling houses to one another. And often you can see them do this, turn right around, sell it again, and they're doing that to try to refinance. And so I think that we might get into a situation again where NAR is going to have to restate its numbers. The builders already have. They restated 5 years of historical prices. They had a high previously. And this is, everybody just looks at month over month or year over year. You got to look at the whole picture. And the builders had a median price high of $490,000 during the COVID, just boom, right? Well, they revised that down to 460,000. Their prices in July, they revised down to below 400,000 for that median price. So I think and then you have to tack on this whole private note space that nobody knows anything about. I've been to several conferences. This was real, but it's not trackable. And it's where all these private note investors came into the market. If they saw that, for instance, there was a notice of default filed on county record, They call them up and say, "Listen, I got a deal for you. I'm gonna pay your mortgage for you. If you wanna stay here, you can pay me rent, and maybe we can do a rent-to-own agreement. Or if you need to leave because you just can't afford it, I'm gonna find somebody to buy this, and I'm gonna pay you out some equity," like a cash for keys situation. And so there's this large part of the market, and Inman, which is an industry publication, looked at Austin and said that almost 50% of sales were happening off of the MLS, which is the big, there's over 600 of them in the country. They track all these local markets. And so I think we're missing a huge chunk, as well as what was happening. And I've seen this now with so many properties where somebody will say, "Will you look at this property for me?" And I was like, "Sure." What they did is they do fake transactions, and they'd say, "Okay, I'm gonna lend it I'm gonna sell it to Peter for $2,000,000, but no money ever exchanged hands." Instead, what Peter did is he took that last comp, he went to the bank, and he did a cash out refi. $2,000,000 is printed overnight. That's how, I mean, just printed. You wanna talk about money printing? That's what they're doing in this space. And so there's so many different, everybody always wants one reason or one thing that's gonna cause issues in the housing market, but it's so complicated. And I just think that this is why we're not seeing it come down on paper yet. But I think we'll look back and I think we'll have revisions for sure. Case Shiller just went non-seasonally adjusted negative. They had been seasonally adjusting at negative for months, but I don't I've too many issues with these seasonal adjustments, but they just went negative. Now, what the industry thinks is that because it's a 3-month lag and because they've been looking at NAR, they think that essentially NAR is leading Case Shiller and that you're actually going to see a reacceleration. I think that might not be accurate at all. But one thing also, it matters the regional differences. We're going to see NAR come out. I model NAR's results using Redfin results. We're going to see NAR come out with a little bit acceleration in the year-over-year home price, but that's because most of the sales were actually in the West, where you have the highest home prices, as well as who can transact. And so the other thing as to why prices aren't going down is our government subprime. And, the FHA program that was 7% of the market during the last cycle is now anywhere from 13 to 15% of the market. And you can have a credit score as low as 580, sometimes even a little lower with compensating factors, and it's only 3.5% down. Now, okay, also what happened through the American Rescue Act is you had a ton of money flow into these cities and states, and they put that into affordable housing programs that would essentially give people 10, 20, 30,000. In fact, I just did a deep dive on Portland. They were giving immigrants $30,000 in down payment assistance. And so at the same, you have government coming in and really propping up those prices, similar to what you see in the student loan area where they got involved and then suddenly tuition just started skyrocketing. So there's so there's so many reasons, and that private note thing is big because they use servicers, but guess what? Those servicers don't report to credit. And so there's just a large black hole out there, very similar to what we're seeing in Tricolor. And first, Tricolor was lending to foreign born and often without credit scores. And I don't think they were reporting to credit. And so I don't think the Fed or anyone has a real understanding because they use Experian to do their household debt and credit survey. So I threw, again, a lot at you, but there's just so many different reasons why this market is propped up.
Let me ask a question. When I think about this from like the classic EMB economist kind of argument, you would see that if I'm understanding what you're saying is like there's an enormous amount of capital that's basically been injected both by the government, by private actors, by kind of this like shadow market into the housing market, and it's driven up prices, so it's out of reach of people who don't have access to these, kind of like these inflated assets. What when I think about this from an economist perspective, my understanding would be that you would expect this to result in more building, right? Like you would see prices go up, then this capital would be allocated to like productively constructing new homes. I'm wondering kind of from your model, like why is this breaking down? Like why home prices are increasing, but it's not resulting in kind of like an explosion of supply. So is that because like I'm interested in kind of very like if you can help me walk through what I'm missing from this picture.
Yeah, so what I did when I got on the road in January 23 is I could tell there was way more building than what anybody, was saying, and you can we have overbuilt. There is a massive oversupply out there, and one of the problems is that the survey of construction is a survey. You ask the builders about this stuff. Also, you don't have to file permits in unincorporated areas in certain states. So I think we have a huge misunderstanding about how much inventory was just recently built. You guys may have seen that tweet from our True Social from Trump that was saying, look at all these undeveloped lots. I thank God for that because if you see what I see, it has they have gone absolutely bananas. We will have to bulldoze some of these. And so I do think that building happened, but we had two misunderstandings about it. One, we misunderstood what this market really was about and what that household formation was really about. We pulled it forward during COVID, such that, the average home size right now is 2.5. Whenever I ask most people that, I say, what do you think the average US household home size is? They say 4, 4.2. 3.5. No. When you just purely take the math and you take housing units and you take population, it's 2.5. And for the longest time, that was just going like this. But we've stopped that now. And what I think
Yeah.
you're about to see is that's going to increase because people I remember I was renting two places during COVID. One near my sister because she was a doctor and I was worried that I might need to help her with her kids. And then my one back in PA. And so you had this fake housing formation happen and the kind of pull for it. So I think that we're going to and we also have 15 million vacant homes. And the other side of this is the demographics that nobody wants to talk. They want to just look purely at, well, we built this much, last for that's crazy when your demographics are changing. And so I think that when we start to see these properties come on the market, as they're even doing right now, because the boomers will be leaving like 15.6 million by the time we hit 2035, and they own the majority of the homes. And so I think that actually that has happened. We
Yeah.
we went out and built like bananas, and I wish I could take people with me because even the drone footage doesn't do it because you'll get one and then you'll go down and it's like massive. And then you'll go right, not even a mile. And there's another one and there's another one.
Yeah.
And pretty soon all the drone footage looks exactly the same. And it takes standing in those subdivisions to understand that we completely went bananas and overbuilt.
So you highlighted the Dallas market and Dallas suburbs, these communities being built. Austin on the multifamily side is kind of a similar story of overbuilding. Was it that they were sort of over forecasting population inflows into these areas, and is that also prevalent across the rest of the Sun Belt?
100%. Because what it was, and this is what I said at the time, because I went and talked to people. Nobody talks to people anymore. And what you could tell is a lot of the influx was temporary. It was people that couldn't get jobs in the Northeast came down to the Sun Belt because it was open for business. So you could, if you were a hospitality worker, you would come down. I cannot tell you how many hotel people I met that's exactly what they did. But then you had the building boom. And so all those construction workers came and were there renting temporarily, whatever. And so you would hear narratives like 200 people are moving to Austin today, 100 people are moving to Nashville today. Well, when you go back and you actually look at that, number one, that was simply untrue, just untrue. But number two, what was that? A lot of it was immigrants and illegal
Mm.
immigrants, unfortunately. And so what's happening now is that people are leaving those areas, and they over calculated. And I can tell you that when I was in Austin, I called a lot of people in the industry, and I was like, "This guys, you got to under what is happening here is crazy," because Austin was my first trip. And I talked to the biggest data aggregator out there for new homes. And I said, "You will not believe what I'm saying." And they're like, "You're crazy. All of that's there's going to be no issue in multifamily. There's going to be no issue in single family." And I'd say, "Well, what about this neighborhood? And what about this? And what about this?" And they'd be like, "Well, yeah, that probably will have some issues." So it was just wild. Everybody was just writing on this narrative that was just so detached from reality. That also included that we were all getting rich. because we had that tiny little spate of, wage increases. And so what did they build out there? They built a lot of luxury as well, and speculative luxury. Like, and everybody got into it. Like, realtors were building 10 million plus spec homes. Like, that is crazy to me. So, I do think it was just narrative, and that there's oh, sorry, I know that was a long answer, but quickly, my
No,
favorite chart to
this is
post
great.
about Florida is because, you guys remember when everybody was moving to Florida, right? It's a full population chart from, the end of the World War, and you can see that actually, relocation to Florida has been consistently going down and did so during the COVID period. And so it's just like, it's just wild to realize that facts don't matter.
So I guess it's interesting because if based on the picture you're painting, I would take the impression that like the housing market's gonna implode in the near term, right? That like we're gonna be facing some kind of like probably maybe even worse than 2008, 2009 financial crisis. Do you think that that's true? Like, do you think because housing is so important to so many people's like net worth? Like, I think of my own family, like how many of my extended relatives their retirement is dependent on it. So I'm interested in kind of like where you think this is headed in the medium term, like let's say like 5 years.
In the medium term, and this all depends on government programs, intervention, but I feel like they've kind of run out of runway here. I do believe this is gonna be worse than 2008. I do believe that we might have a real correction here, meaning that home prices will be married again to that household median income and what people can afford. Because you're just seeing, and I'm helping people right now that are leaving properties to these kids, they can't afford them, they have to sell them. And so, you're just in such a state of unaffordability that this stuff and is just gonna start flying to the market, including and that short-term rental is just beginning. And the institutionals, to your point, are just beginning. And so you can look at somewhere like Atlanta and San Antonio where institutionals went nuts. Like, they bought up so much, and they're having to do orderly disposition there because they
Mhm.
don't wanna, freak the market out either, but I've talked to them, and as soon as those leases are over, they're rehabbing them, they're getting them sold as quickly as possible. And so it's to me, it's just timing. It's just all these
Mhm.
things. And when the administration extended that FHA program, that meant we had more to go. But now they've locked that down starting October 1, and there will be limitations on it that is going to put a real
Additionally,
go ahead.
with the FHA, loans and everything that were granted to immigrants has completely come
Stop.
almost to zero.
That's right.
Um, yeah, and that's over maybe the past couple months. I just saw a chart from John Burns.
Burns. Yeah,
Yeah.
6% was what it was. Like,
Hmm.
that's insane.
Yeah. So okay, let's assume that sort of there's a correction in the works. That seems likely, unless there is some like shoot up, and like you said, some sort of fiscal side intervention or a demand shock. It seems like there's going to be this reflexive process where every homeowner or landlord or institution, even every investor is going to get wind of it becoming sort of a seller's market or a buyer's market. Things turn over, and then everybody piles on, and listings go up.
Mhm.
Um, is this like is this ultimately the right thing? Like, for policymakers, wouldn't if tomorrow home prices were 20% lower, wouldn't that solve a lot of what they say are the problems? And so, like, I guess my question is, why not let the market run its course? If it is indeed to the downside, that would presumably increase affordability. But on the other side of that, you have this like economic multiplier effect of the real estate market. It flows over to so many other sectors of the economy, and so if incomes drop and unemployment goes up at the same time, then we're in a different. We're just homes are cheaper, but the economy is in a worse place. So how do you think about all that?
So I think about it a lot, and I go back and forth. And I honestly believe, despite the rhetoric, the housing emergency or whatever, that they're doing precisely what you're saying. They're letting this play out. And I look at their actions, not their words. And although they put in a ton of money and for some HUD programs, most of them are really about low income people and really low income, like income adjustments and things like that. But putting the guardrails on this program for FHA says to me that they're gonna let this keep going. And so now I think there's probably some fighting around that because, again, just the idea to say, "Oh my gosh," like, if we start hitting, houses, boomers are gonna start taking gains from the stock market. They're gonna have I mean, all of a sudden,
Mhm.
your wealth effect is reversing, and that has all kinds of downstream implications. And so if it were me and I was playing 3D chess, I would kinda do exactly what Trump and Powell have done here. I mean, I would never do this, by the way, I'm just saying, like, thinking about game theory, that I would fight in public, but I would also know exactly what both of my actions are doing, that it will affect exactly what we need, which is I mean, we have to without making the boomers mad, right? Without somehow we have to affect this correction so that our kids have some, options. And so a lot of what I think we're seeing from the administration is kayfabe. It's just a wrestling match. It's not really what's going on. I worked in politics. I know how this all works behind the scenes. And so I kind of feel like you pretend like it's each other's fault. Oh, it's the tariffs. Oh, it's the rates, and then you just let this thing play out. And of course there's going to be some fall guys somewhere, right? Like and those have probably already been chosen. To me, when I look at the stock market, I think Nvidia, Jensen Huang, lots very interesting history, that guy with fraud. I think he'll probably be the fall guy there. I think we're getting ready for the builders to be the fall guy. They're gonna blame them for not building because people think, "Oh, all those empty lots." In reality, I think somebody does know that they've built too much, but it's all a dog and pony show. I just look at the actions. Who knows what they'll actually do, but it feels like they're letting it go.
So
The home
I
builders,
sorry about it.
yeah, the home builders seem to know that they've built too much. I mean, that they're rolling out all kinds of incentives, rate buy downs, and even Lennar launched the investor marketplace
Right,
to sort of bridge the demand gap, presumably, right?
right,
Um,
right.
so on the demand side, um, have you thought about any sort of are we at the end of the road in like mortgage innovation and sort of tinkering with financial engineering to unlock more demand? Because what I'm hearing across the board is that demand is winning, like both at on the secular level and also like short term, that demand is turning over.
Like, increasing, you mean?
No, I mean
Uh,
decreasing. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. I
rolling
mean,
over.
yeah. I mean, last year we had the lowest sales since 1995 in the existing home market. We've increased population by 20%. Doesn't make any sense, right? And so I look at combined sales. I look at both new and existing. In August, we had the worst sales for combined sales since 1999, excluding August of 2010. So, the demand, there is no demand. There's no demand and that's exactly what you're seeing finally in the builder earnings. And they've done a lot of creative financing, a lot of off balance sheet shenanigans to stay alive. But you're seeing the builders now, sales are down, orders are down. And if I were Lennar, I would be terrified right now. I mean, because they're all over the country, empty neighborhoods, which is, I believe likely we're going to see they got a bailout last cycle. We're probably going to see some kind of bailout with them around the affordable housing.
Mm.
But yeah, there is no demand at these prices. They're having to get it down to 350,000 because if you take all of those, the buy downs, the gift cards, the refrigerator, all of this stuff, you're taking about $55,000 off of each one of these homes. So we're already in the 300s,
Hmm.
which is, so yeah, they seem to know. They're all I mean, they must what kills me, though, is I don't think they have done what I've done. Nobody from that company has driven all over the country. I think they each have their regions, and they talk about their regions, and I had a builder group at my former company, and they were the last ones. They were always saying, "No, no, no," based on their conversations on the golf course. "No, they've got it. They've got it. We've got great relationships. No problem with the new builds." Boom, overnight, there was awareness. So I think that the way business is structured, people don't look at anything holistically, and so I think they miss a lot of what's actually going on.
So I have a question, which is, do you think it's possible? This is an anecdotal experience that in some places there's been massive overbuilding, right? Like in Texas and in Florida, and then in other places we're probably still like not building enough, right? Like I used to live in Palo Alto, like near San Francisco, and there was like effectively zero construction in that area. There was enormous demand. People would have loved to live in the neighborhood. If you had thrown up a multifamily apartment building there, I mean, you could have sold it for like $5,000 a month for rent, and people would have paid it. And so there's part of me wonders if like the story is not so much that we've overbuilt everywhere, but that in these certain markets we've massively overbuilt, and so the correction might just be localized rather than some national one. I'm interested in what you think about that.
Unfortunately, you're absolutely right. There are places we completely overbuilt, places we didn't, but let me tell you, even in the places that you think we didn't do this, every available spot we could build, we built.
Mm,
Places in the Northeast where like New Jersey, maybe not as many homes, but a ton of multifamily, et cetera. But in those spots, the unaffordability factor is coming into play. And this is why you had 300,000 people leave LA between 2020 and 2025. That's a huge, okay. So where they didn't do the overbuilding, you've got a huge demographic problem.
Yeah.
Additionally, you have to think about these markets, not again, like you and me owning things. Like you look at somewhere like Palo Alto, or you look at San Fran, or you look at LA, most of those homes are owned by someone else. They're renting them out because just like you say, that desirability. And you would be surprised how many of that people keep that on the DL, right? Because they want to pretend like they're homeowners, not renters. But you would be surprised how much renting is happening in those locations. And who owns those homes? The boomers. And they're going to have to get rid of them. Not to mention, you just have people fleeing California at a record pace, for instance. Same in Boston, same in Chicago, same in New York. The only thing, so these sanctuary cities are very strategically placed to make look like the demographics aren't declining as badly as and I don't know if that was, I'm not saying that was by design, but you look at it, these were places that were losing population to show that, they weren't losing it anymore. In reality, we now know that most of that was just immigration and is reversing. So I think that's why I track 85 markets. That's why I drive across the country. But I think there was probably more building than you thought and areas adjacent. And then that combination of people, what'll happen is a lot of that exurb building, people are getting sucked out of your city centers because they can afford to live out there. And so there's going to be a big vacuum in the city centers from everybody that left to go get affordable housing. So I think it depends on the area, but I can tell you a story for every single neighborhood that you think is immune. You can look behind the scenes, you can see the deaths, the property tax liens, the owner occupancy liens, all of this, and the fact that so much of it is not owner occupied. It's held by your mom and pop investors.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
So in some of these superstar markets, like you have to think that like falling or flat rents will lead to like a sharp reduction in multifamily starts. Same with you would think that sort of extends over to single family to some extent. Um, and I'm wondering, so I kind of wanted to segue into the YIMBY movement, uh, the abundance movement, the abundance agenda. Um, I think the strongest argument to me for for like sort of deregulation and hope, um, is that you can potentially through lower minimum lot sizes, through permit shot clocks, through upzoning, that you can improve the economics of multifamily development in these areas where it's just not feasible right now. With the underlying uh, belief being that landlords and developers will cluster around the regions that have high renter yields, right? Um, and so if you can improve that yield profile for them by lowering these, as regulatory tax, um, by lowering that burden, then you could actually spur development in these superstar cities where densification could actually lead to economic gains. What's your general view on the YIMBY movement, the abundance agenda, the raft of legislation that took place in California recently, and then anything else on the horizon?
Yeah, it's hard to talk kind of about it the same, like, it's so specific to areas, certain areas, right? You
Hmm.
take somewhere like New York where everybody's like, "Oh, we don't have enough," or "We need to do this," or "We need to" No, reality is people are holding apartments, vacant apartments off market, some believe almost 100,000 because of a 2019 law where they couldn't raise rents to a certain point to cover their expenses for what was required, for code, upgrades and things like that, and so, I guess what I actually think it would solve the problem is it's going to be local to each community, but no, almost I gotta tell you how many stories I hear all the time about people not being able to evict people, so all these things have to be, confronted, and I just I don't know how much of this really is about some of these regulations, like, in terms of just the permits, just the zoning, just this. I think it's a lot bigger, and it has to do with, you know, uh, like, taxes. I mean, do I wanna move to Portland? I'm taxed more than San Francisco. Do I wanna develop in Portland? No, and so I think that the current solutions on the table are just not in any way, comprehensive enough to really have an impact, and that, this is honestly, if we could I do believe we need to get government out of this. I mean, and I do believe we have to have thoughtful zoning, but because this market is so much about speculation, um, I just don't know that abundance, that idea of just relaxing, these regulations is gonna be a real kind of antidote to what we're experiencing.
Hmm.
What do you think about it?
Yeah, like I said, I think that I mean you can have two major metros in this country that have entirely opposite stories.
Right.
I look at basically Austin and LA as being almost like the opposite story right
Right.
now, where Austin has overbuilt and the forecast for population growth is diminishing. And so you wonder, I don't know. I look at it as there are spatial misallocations
Yes.
abound right now,
Yep.
where you have
Yeah.
basically
And not just facial
the
to plug in, but also, like, the topology of the types of housing that's
Yes.
available, right? So it's like
Yes.
that it's not just that in some places they've overbuilt, it's that these, like, without children kind of apartments
Yes.
are the only topology that
Right.
so
exists.
exactly, and so you have, like, let's say John, who's 25, college educated, living in the Midwest, underperforming his potential income wise because he's being priced out of these more expensive markets. And I think that, like, if people were able to afford housing in these superstar cities that are unaffordable, Austin is not unaffordable. LA and San Francisco and Boston and New York are. Um, I I I feel like you could unlock more overall economic activity, and there's research that shows that this is true. Um, so so I look at that as like a core problem at the national level is that is that there's this mismatch effect,
Yeah.
and I think that for one reason is you have different tax conditions in different locales, and the inability to raise homeowner taxes in California sort of creates these corporate communities that like wield this shareholder or homeowners vote veto at city council meetings, and it's in their best interest to not let new people into the community, such that it would inundate the infrastructure, the scarce resources, the schooling system, et cetera. And so I look at that as being one of the major problems, is basically creating some sort of national model that allows communities to develop, to welcome population growth because it means that there's going to be a new wing to the school because of higher, a larger tax base. And so, yeah, I'm kind of just rambling here, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think, it's very much so here's another thing. I think that we don't quite understand how emptied out some of these star locations are. And how, like, you take somewhere like New York City where I spent a lot of my career. I recently I mean, I go to New York several times a year, but recently I actually walked the entire city from top to bottom, which is not something people fly into New York, they go to where they go, they get back on the plane. And guys, it has changed so much, I can't even explain. It's not this huge center anymore. It's these buildings are empty. There's hardly I mean, you take just now, we saw yesterday, I think it was yesterday, that Fox headquarters, is going into, like they just had a slash in the value on their space, and if you've ever been there, I mean, it's a massive building, a space. When you walk around these centers in New York City, there is not the activity that we are used to. And so I think we kind of have same with Boston. Boston is emptying out. And so here's my thought too. I think that is an idea that was a part of our older model is that people could move to cities and make more money there. I think that model is actually changing because I think we through hyper financialization, we created a lot of there's a great book. I don't want it's called BS Jobs. I won't say the name on here, but it's literally called BS Jobs. And we've created a ton of jobs to support hyper financialization that you don't really need. I think this is part of the AI. It's partly a ruse of we don't really need all these people to do this stuff anymore. What I would do, like honestly, is I wish what we would have done with all this money, all that American Rescue Act money is built, high-speed rail or something
Mhm.
like this so that I could get from point A to point B a lot faster without congesting roads. Because you mentioned a key part that I see all over this country is infrastructure. And it's nobody where they built, like out in Phoenix and these exurbs, no infrastructure. Surprise, that is going to be one surprise to a lot of investors for a long time. You had one way back and forth, but you built like 7,000, way more than that homes. And so you can't even get to the highway, like,
Mhm.
now, and they're not even full. And so I think a lot of solutions are going to have to be local to these cities that say, look at we got to accept we've got a 30% vacancy rate for commercial real estate downtown. We've got these empty neighborhoods. We've got to come and we have to really figure this out and plan the city. What do we want the city to be like? I mean, what they do all over the country is you can see each cycle. You can see what they built
Mhm.
in each cycle and then they abandon it and it's still here. and then they build something else, and then they abandon that. And that's what we did. Like, you go to Dallas, downtown Dallas, so much empty commercial real estate, but they've got like 6 massive towers, in progress right now, and the cranes are swinging. So I guess something I learned in my mortgage career, is that it's very difficult to solution on an aggregate level. Like, because each of these situations, as you guys say, are
Yeah.
very unique. But if we were going to do something, could we have just focused on infrastructure? And maybe
Hmm.
instead of like subsidies for, EVs, we could have done something that would have truly been good for the environment, like a transportation system that would not be as polluted. So I
Hmm.
don't
It's
know.
interesting because there is, for me, as like a younger person, I'm 27, like a little bit of a silver lining here, if it's true that like the housing market's going to like correct, right? Where it is 100% unaffordable today. Like I rent an apartment, and I couldn't imagine buying something in the area that I live in the DC suburbs. But if it is true that housing markets went down by like 30%, 40%, that would no longer be true, right? Like I would now be able to afford a home. So I guess my question here is like, is there something kind of like good that could come out of this like cleansing by fire? Like, let's just say everything you're saying is true. They've massively overbuilt all these like, these companies that seem to be doing bad things. They're all just going to get cleared out. What is there like a silver lining on the other end of this, a light at the end of the tunnel?
And as an extension, like where's that fine line between a correction being healthy and it being systemic and having knock-on effects?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of silver lining. I mean, if we would just let creative destruction happen, if we would just let all of this speculation rinse out of the market and not, hey, my buddy, he can't lose money on that house. It seems very much it's one big club and none of us are in it, right? And like all of them are doing just fine. Um, the asset holders are getting richer while the rest of us aren't. And so if they could just let it rinse out, it's a massive, massive good thing for society. I think right now this, increased violence we're experiencing is because people who are 27 who can't afford the American dream and they feel hopeless about everything. So I think there's a massive upside to all of this if they let it happen. And then I forget the extension question was.
Yeah. So what, how can there be, how can a healthy correction be shepherded
Okay, yeah,
versus a systemic meltdown where every counterparty down the chain ends up becoming insolvent because their foreclosure projections weren't underwritten correctly or whatever it may be. Like how does that systemic nature of real estate, which adheres to debt cycles, how does that where's the fine line between a healthy correction and that becoming a systemic risk to the rest of the economy?
I think it's gonna be a systemic risk to the economy. I think it always is, right? I think if consumption is 70% of GDP, that wealth effect is critical. I think that we are gonna have to take the pain, and I don't think that once you let the train out of the station, which, by the way, I think that has already happened. I don't think you can say, "Oh, they have slowed it down." This is what I think so few people understand is we had more aggressive intervention in the mortgage market than we did post the GFC. We've already
Hmm.
had that. I mean, so they have slowed it down as much as they possibly can. Because really, I think a lot of people look at 2019 and people were saying that it was overvalued in the housing market. And, we were looking like we were about to go into recession. So I think they have slowed it down to some extent. But I think that when that demographics tsunami hits, it could get really unruly really quickly.
Hmm.
And so I think, you try to do something else. You try to create jobs that where people can afford to own a home. Like when Ford started and you worked at an auto plant, you were able to afford 2.2 cars a year on your salary. If you are working in one of these plants now, you can't even afford one of those cars in a year with your salary. So I think that if we could get jobs, like really productive jobs, back in this economy, then that's how we could save it from becoming completely a train wreck and just, kill the economy completely.
Mhm.
So we've been talking for like 50 minutes. If we're planning to wrap it up in about 10 minutes, I think I want to open it up to the audience. We got like 270 people here. So if any of you, thank you so much for stopping by the way. So we have time for probably 2 or 3 questions. So if any of you y'all want to drop anything in there, we can see if Melody has
Yeah,
any thoughts.
Scott said that prices will come down fast. Um, yeah, it's usually like an escalator up, elevator down. In most asset markets, I think that's similar with real estate. But you can build high-speed rail at fire sale land prices, but then where will it take people? A burned out city tour. I mean, that's a fair point. That's why I asked about this systemic nature of the real estate markets. Whenever we talk about like the stock market, um, corrections are often painted as healthy, where it's like, okay, the over leverage, the people who had poor capital discipline, they get washed out. The weak hands get washed out, and then we have a strong base to start another upcycle. But in real estate, there's just so many systemic factors to consider there. Because it's like a real economy asset. It's not just a piece of paper, saying that you own part of a corporation. Um, and so, yeah, I guess I can understand why people have a disdain for the financialization of real estate because it functions as both like shelter and a yield bearing asset.
Yeah.
Um, mhm. How-
On the census website, they treat your home like it's an investment, not,
mhm.
a depreciating asset. And as it is. And so just to say that to speak to the burned out towns high speed rail, but this is my point. It's like that burned out town needs to sit down and plan what do they want this community to be and understand rationally, not just to get rich, because that's what's all of this is about. How can I get in on the grift? Like how can I get on that big EV subsidy? How can I get in on you guys probably just saw in the guy that just got arrested, he took $2 million for homeless housing, and it went to a lime green Bentley instead. And so that's and I've seen this all over the country from that American Rescue Act money. It went into a lot of these fraudulent programs, and if they're not fraudulent, they're trying to actually just make sure they keep getting funding. So my point is that I think this is going to take hard work and planning, and there are no easy answers, but that means that people have to get involved locally. They have to show up and talk to whomever if it's a boomer or somebody that isn't like the NIMBY, and say, no, this is why, and this is why we've got to do it. And I mean, it's just hard work. Everybody wants an easy answer.
Hmm.
So I mean,
But
lots of great.
there's this
Go ahead.
symmetry
Good idea.
to the housing market. There's this symmetry where it's like what's bad for landlords and developers is good for renters and home buyers. And to the extent that the landlords and developers feel the pain, then that's on the other side, benefit for home buyers and renters. And so so long as the economy treads water, you can have a strong base to lift that next upcycle. um, yeah, there's a few people asking about sort of your predictions. One for like in the next 12 months, the prediction for the state of the housing market, and then also looking ahead to 2028. How do you think this sort of flows through to the political economy?
And I just want to build on the 2028 part because I think I'm interested in your thoughts on this. Where it seems like the home people care a lot about an enormous amount about home prices from a political perspective, right? And the super majority of Americans own homes, and so it seems like even if it's good for this like cleansing fire to come through and like eat everything, it would still cause, I have to imagine these like enormous political ramifications. So, we still have more money in our chest. Like we could just keep pumping up demand more, like in principle, like obviously it's unsustainable at some point. So just, I guess I just wanted to add a little bit of my own flavor to that. And I'm interested just to see if you have any final thoughts.
Yes. So, it's very interesting. I would have thought we would have been down more this year. And again, I think when history flushes out and we look at all this, it probably was. But I think that if it follows previous cycles, we are going to have a bigger drop. Like, during the GFC, we had a year of 12% home price drop year over year. And then it kind of was just gradually, another 5% here, another and so it all depends on the narrative and awareness. And I think if we have some sort of credit event, which feels like it's brewing in the auto sector right now, right, then that awareness will happen faster. If what I just saw in 30 plus delinquency is telling me that finally all these programs are running out and things like that, then it's going to happen faster, but it's going to depend on awareness. And so I would imagine we could skate here all the way to Q2 2026 with very low year-over-year price declines or something like that, but by then, that's when you're gonna have material foreclosures unless they intervene, and so I think, that is when and honestly, I think once we can see that distress and it's your next door neighbor, it's like that, then that's when the change in awareness and this will accelerate. And so the direction is down, that's the path we're headed on, but every event sort of like speeds it up or slows it down. And I think
Hmm.
if we had a stock market correction, and a credit event, that's gonna speed everything up. But, going forward to 2028, I agree with you. This is a very hot button political issue, but neither one of the candidates really ran on anything last time. Like, whatever they were saying was just stupid. Like, "Oh, a $25,000." Okay, well, every city in the country, you can already get that in a down payment assistance program, so that's nothing. And so it almost feels to me, again, I can just look at what happens is that as much as they know it's a hot button issue, they don't have a lot of good solutions and they'll give lip service to it again. And maybe that's where we are, that maybe not everybody in this current administration, but there are people that understand we have hit the end of the road with our debt, with all of this, and that we've got to go where the money is. And where is the money? I mean, it's essentially like how do we get there? So I think 28 would probably be very similar to this last. They did some lip service, but nothing massive. But it depends on how high foreclosure are at that point. Then that's a whole nother
Yeah.
story.
I wonder. So basically, what I'm hearing is that there's since there's a lack of price discovery in the real estate market, let's say, usually that is coincides with a lack of liquidity or some other constraint on transactions happening. And in the current housing market, that makes me think about the rate locked-in effect, where you have still a good, I don't know, what is it, like 40% of mortgages are sub 3% fixed rate. And so I did, in these final minutes, want to get your take on the 30-year fixed rate mortgage, how standardized and institutionalized it's become. I heard some takes on Twitter that it's basically a scam because there's that prepayment risk that's built in. It's suboptimal for a bank to own that, but through Fannie and Freddie and the securitization of it, it makes it palatable for them. Because on the other side, for their demand deposits, they have to pay out a varying rate, and so that introduces a lot of risk if those are the two sides of the balance sheet. One's a fixed rate, and then you're subject to a variable rate. Um, on the 30-year mortgage, wouldn't it be true that if you could reintroduce, I know like the variable rate idea is there are some pretty nasty heuristics around that in this country, especially given what happened in 2008. But I'm wondering if you've ever thought about a variable term mortgage. I know that's done some in some places,
Yeah.
but such that you can like have a stable cash flow every month, cash
Yeah.
outflow for a household, but a variable term.
100%. We shouldn't be doing 30-year mortgages. Most countries don't. I mean,
Hmm.
and your typical mortgage pays off in 7 years. I mean, that's the industry average. They build all of their hedging off that. They know that. So whatever
Hmm.
about that 30. I mean, But they did this for the securitization markets, which nowhere else in the world have they become and I put this in quotation marks, as effective as they are here. And so I'd totally be down to 5 to 7% if people can be prudent. But it needs to go back to the banks and see what the banks did after the GFC is they stopped lending because of
Hmm.
all of the restrictions and Basel III endgame and
Yep.
risk, and so it needs to go back to the banks who are getting deposits, and they need to be able to charge whatever interest rate they need to charge to make money off that product. And
Hmm.
I know that we look at the banks as like these big evil banks, and believe me, they do a lot of evil crap. But, it has to there's a great book by Edward Chancellor that if you haven't read it, I 100% recommend it, called The Price of Time. And it goes back and looks at interest rates since time immemorial, which, by the way, before we could write, we were charging interest on
Hmm.
things. And so I think you have to have the right interest rate. These mortgages, if done correctly, can be very profitable, and the banks know this. And so, yes, you have to be able to do whatever product makes sense. But when you have the government owning 85% of outstanding mortgages, that's not even the game anymore. I personally believe the banks want back into mortgage. That's part of this whole SLR reduction capital lesson. So I know we're coming to the end. I do have a few extra minutes if you wanted to stay on a little bit. So
Sure.
whatever you guys
Yeah,
want.
there's no huge rush
Absolutely.
on our end.
Okay.
Hmm. Yeah. Maybe some other questions. Um,
I'll just say, I mean, I would love to see securitization out of mortgage completely. And it is so difficult for people to even imagine that. I mean, it's like,
yeah.
but
What would that look
obviously,
like?
yeah, well,
I mean, you can't. It seems like the genie's out of the bottle. You can't really put it back in.
I think if we could get to a point where mortgage is rational again, it's not about speculation, and your small regional banks could be well, as long as they were acting in good, not this crazy leverage space we're in now. I think you could do it, but it would be Wall Street would fall apart. I mean, absolutely, would
Yeah. There's
completely implode.
there's trillions resting on the
Oh yeah,
MBS market.
yeah,
The Fed still owns 2 trillion. The Fed would have to
oh yeah,
run
two
all of
trillion.
that off their balance sheet first. Man.
Yeah,
Oh
and
yeah,
and I can't even imagine the short-term pain that would be created, right? Because you would have
Yeah.
just this like capital flight from kind of the market, and obviously like in the long run that might have these positive effects. But
But in the short run, the more like the home lending market would freeze up, right?
in the very short term, it would. But if
Hmm.
you could do a program where instead of like bailing out these big banks, right, giving them these huge swap lines, why don't we go out to the smaller community banks?
Hmm.
Why don't we give them support, let them go into their local communities and lend like they're supposed to be doing? And it would freeze. Believe me, it would freeze and fall apart. But what would be gone? All of this hyper-financialization that does nobody any good except for the top 1%. It is not good for you and me, none of it. And so because it's a Ponzi scheme. I mean, I can tell you that you have to if you are not getting money coming into that system, it completely seizes up
Hmm.
because nobody is being rational about it. It's about that continuous movement of the. I mean, when I started a mortgage, we had to take a class where you took $1 and you watched it move in this thing. And you make so little money. We are just moving money around. That's all it
Hmm.
is. So that the speculators and the gamblers can speculate on it in another market. And so it's not
Hmm.
productive money. And so I think if we could work on policies, let um, where money could actually be productive again, go into, the banks, we know who did they lend to last year and this year? Non-depository financial institutions like Tricolor, like First Friends. But if they were lending out into the real economy, I mean, it would be a completely different situation.
Hmm.
So I agree with you. It would be, I mean, New York would fall apart. Markets all across the world would fall apart. But I think it would be so healthy for the system.
Hmm. What are your thoughts on this is a hard pivot. But what are your thoughts? I just wanted to get in your thoughts on sort of the build to rent business model.
Oh God.
Um, which is what we've seen a lot of large PE firms sort of pivot from buy to rent to build to rent as they're selling off their COVID era single family properties. Presumably they're putting that capital into build to rent, and the economics of it are such that like typically a developer with a sort of the forecast of there being investor or landlord demand on the other side of that 18-month build out. They take the risk of construction, and then that in between they collect maybe 20 to 40% margin when they sell immediately to an investor, and presumably this build to rent model kind of cuts out that margin extraction in the middle. I know that they're two highly different specialized sort of verticals within the same supply chain, if you will. So what are you seeing with the build to rent developments, and what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so this is really what happened at the end of 22. Many builders pivoted to build for rent because they're like, okay, we can see home price acceleration is slowing down, but rent is still going up because people couldn't
Mhm.
afford homes anymore, so they had to rent.
Yeah.
Well, then what did they do? They went out there and they overbuilt, built for rent, and they didn't realize that right down the street is a brand new multifamily building. Right down the street is a builder offering crazy incentives. And so what we've had in the market over the last year and a half are just the builders and these build for rent or long-term rental operators like selling back and forth to each other so they don't have to
I've seen
market.
that in Dallas. I've
Yeah,
seen that in Dallas. My building just got sold, and there's like it's a hot potato game here.
it's all it
Uh,
is. Yeah.
yeah, it
But
really is.
I've seen so many of these empty build for rent subdivisions. I've seen new build subdivisions that were, supposed to be for single family homes, like, for ownership, sold to, like, an American Homes for Rent, and now they look like trash. I mean, like, total trash, like, it's so sad for the 2 families that bought thinking they were buying into, a new home sing of ownership community. So this is just it was just another it was the last game of this new build cycle,
Mm.
and you're gonna see I mean, there's so much what most people cannot understand is how much vacancy there is out there because, like, even where I live in East Tennessee, we have a whole bunch of new build communities that are empty. We have a whole bunch of, homes that were built very or that were bought very cheaply to fix and flip, but they ran out of money to finish the flip, so they're empty. And there's just vacancy everywhere. I mean, I have seen like in Nashville an Evergrande style multifamily building completely empty, just completely empty. And so I just think this was another way to try to get through without losing money at the end of the
So,
cycle.
so so there's a time lag between like these vacancies persisting, and then eventually rents come down, and when
That's
rents
right.
come down, home prices will follow suit, and these are cyclical things. So you would say over the next like 1 to 3 years, we're going to see just some pretty persistent pain
Yes.
in the housing market. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because you gotta think about somewhere like Chicago who has seen the highest increases in rent, and you can look at that, well, like, "What's going on in Chicago? It's booming." No, they were giving $15,000 to illegal immigrants to rent apartments, and so you had this fake government-induced demand that's all reversing, and so,
Mhm.
like you say, this is a massive cycle. I always talk about this. Housing is like the Titanic. It much longer to turn than it does to sink. And so, I think we're going to see you're already seeing it in many markets, rents like this, but now we're going to start to see that pain. And again, it's awareness. Like these sellers believe they can, because they look at their estimate and they say, okay, I can surely, I'm
Mm.
rich, I'm fine. I don't need to sell right now, even though I'm thinking about it. But pretty soon, once awareness hits that, listen, you're not getting that Zestimate, then, I mean, all of this owner's
Then they
equivalent
pull it off
rent.
the market, right?
Yeah.
At least in the
That's
near
what they're
term.
doing. Yeah,
Yeah.
my buddy down in Jacksonville calls it rage delisting, because they're like, "Why can I not get this price?" But, how do we calculate, rent inflation? We use owner's equivalent rent, and so they're getting a phone call and saying, "How much do you think you could rent, your house off," or whatever, and they're diluted, and so, I mean, all these things just take a very long time to turn,
Mhm.
so, yeah.
Gotta say, I love that expression that it takes longer to turn around than it does to sink. I'm
Mhm.
gonna, that's, so
Yeah, many
anyways,
such cases.
many such
Yeah,
cases, exactly. I mean,
yeah.
Melody, this has been an amazing conversation.
Mhm.
I need to run
Yeah.
in just a second, so we're gonna
Yeah,
have to
no,
get
no,
off,
me
but,
too. No, that's good.
And thank you
w
everyone who joined. We're up
yeah,
to
thank you.
306. So,
Yeah, this is by
Awesome.
far our best live stream yet. So thank you so much for
yeah.
Yay.
everyone. I just want
Yay.
to quickly before we get off, I just want to say make sure to subscribe to Melody if you're not already. It was a lovely conversation. We have our essay contest is closing at the end
Mhm.
of the month. So if you
Yeah, you
have
have 9 days.
you have nine
Okay.
days. If you have what you think is a solution to the housing crisis, take the time to write it up. The top prize is $2,500. So we're it's well worth your time to do. I joked like 10 hours could make you $2,500 or more.
Yeah, there you
Um,
go.
and
Mhm.
and Melody,
In this
if
economy.
you want to submit something, we would love to we would love you as well. So
Awesome.
I'll open the invitation.
Thank you so much.
And we're going to be posting and recording this on Substack. So if you're interested in and YouTube, so if you want to watch the whole thing, you can do it that way. But thank you again,
All right.
and it was
Thanks so
lovely
much,
chatting
Melody.
with you.
Yeah, thank you. It's been awesome. Thanks,
All
guys.
right. Bye,
Bye.
everyone.